Architect Divya Chakravarti. She completed her undergraduate studies from SRM University and she went on to pursue her master's in historic preservation and urbanism and study of the built environment from the University of California, Los Angeles. She went on to work for the Department of Planning and Preservation for the city of Pasadena, California. She also did a brief stint of work for Historic Scotland, Edinburgh, UK. She also worked on conservation projects like Kalsa Mahal, Gokhale Hall in Chennai, and Marimalappa Educational Trust in Mysore. She is currently working as a director of Samrakshan Heritage Consultancy. She is also a co-founder of the Artisan Reprisal of Traditional Materials, Method and Technology. She goes on to conduct workshops to revive traditional and lost methods of construction.
Welcome to the UGC program lecture series. The subject we are discussing is architectural conservation. We are looking into the third unit of conservation practice, and this is lecture number 6. In this lecture, we are going to study the case study of Chettinad Palace, and then we will be looking into seismic retrofitting of old heritage buildings and how we can add service additions like accessibility to old historic buildings, and finally heritage site management. In the previous unit, we saw the guidelines of preservation and adaptive reuse. A case study for preservation here is the Chettinad Palace in Karnataka, which is in Tamil Nadu. This is the Chettinad Palace and it is in the village, situated in this village of Karnataka near Karaikudi. This is owned by the Chettiar family of the owners of Chettinad in Chettinad Cements. This was built by Dr. Annamalai Chettiar, who was the founder of the Indian Bank and the Annamalai University in Chidambaram. Like I have mentioned even before, when a building is in disuse and the people who own it are not able to maintain it, then only the concept of adaptive reuse comes into place. But in the terms of the Chettinad Palace in Karnataka, even though it is not used as a residence for an everyday basis because of its size and everything, the different family members do visit the place regularly, and monetarily maintaining the site is never an issue. So, this is a typical case study for preservation of a heritage building. Now, you actually look at the entrance of the palace. Here you have the outside view, and right next to this palace is actually another house, a treasure house of all things Chettinad. You have the furniture, ornaments, vessels, everything that is pertaining to Chettinad architecture and art. This is the inner entrance court, the private entrance for special people and dining. This is the gallery around the patio, the entrance, the courtyard. I am starting off with the images so you get an idea of the majesticness behind the building before we go and delve into the details. It is very important to visually understand the building before we start talking about it. The walls are made of baked bricks. You have the plastering, which is done by the Chettinad lime plaster, which is literally a secret recipe, because how many times it is done now by different people, it is still not giving us the same finish. Initially, the styles that were used, the tiles are Spanish. Later on, based on the Spanish tiles, and the Athangudi tiles came into being, which is nothing but cement tiles. Italian marble is being used as flooring. You have the pillars that are completely made of Burmese teak, and many houses have turret-like structures. You have elaborate guardhouses on the terrace, like you can see over here. And these are the basic materials of building materials that are used in the palace. Here inside, in the interiors, you can see authentic Chettinad house that you will need to see. You will see the open courtyards, which are very important in this kind of style of architecture. Again, you see the pillars that are very common, the wooden pillars and the handcrafted cement Athangudi tiles. The matchbox like structures seem as if, it has a very train carriage like quality. The Chettinad houses are actually built on a rectangular traversal plot, and it stretches across 2 streets. You have the front door in one street and the rear in the second street, and it is a linear plan that it goes in, and carriage after carriage are the rooms that you see. Looking in front in the main threshold, your eye actually travels in a straight line covering every courtyard and then finally in a diminishing rectangle of light leading to the back door. In terms of construction techniques, you have the Madras terrace roof, which is very important. Handmade floor tiles from Athangudi are inlaid on the Madras terrace roof, patterned with joists imported from Burma as battens and melamine Burma teak. Then the lime plastering of the Chettinad lime plaster, which is used for whitewashing the walls. It consists of lime and egg white. This is another few photographs of the site. Now, if you think of the construction techniques and the materials, it is decorative, it is elaborate, it's beautifully done, and it's imported as well. Even though it is a reflection of the Chettiar kind of lifestyle, it is a reflection because they were tradespeople. They traveled widely to East Asian countries like Indonesia, Burma and places like that, and as well as Europe. So, it is a reflection of both. It was like a balance, and their houses not only reflected their kind of living, but even artifacts and art products from across the different countries. So, you have chandeliers from Italy, teak from Burma, crockery from Indonesia, crystals from Europe, and wall-to-wall mirrors from Belgium. The woodwork and stonework is inspired from the houses of France and other European destinations. So, what they basically did was they kind of were inspired by whatever they saw in grandeur in terms of the European style of architecture, but they brought it down to their kind of living finally, which was happening in their hometown of Kanadakatan. A typical Chettinad construction, you have a huge elaborately carved teak front door with an image of Lakshmi, and then you have the pillared corridors on each side that lead to individual rooms, and each room is usually given to one married son. Then you have a triangular slot for the provision of a lamp, then large dining spaces, and the third courtyard is meant for the women folk, and the Nalangatte or the fourth courtyard is basically comprised of kitchens. So, when you think of the large dining spaces, you would think it's basically a residence. So, why do you need large dining spaces? The main characteristic of the Chettinad house was built as a symbol of status. So, it is a symbol of status for them to say that 200 people ate in their house, 250 people ate in their house. The kitchen did not cater only to the family members, but to the entire people, because they were trading communities. People would travel and come and meet them. They would exchange products and money and things like that. So, it had to be done in a safe environment. They did not have the concept of hotels or motels at that point of time. So, it was done in a similar fashion. So, courtyards played a very important role, and the rooms surrounding the courtyards ensured that from the exterior people could not come in. It is only one way access. So, safety was ensured because they were tradespeople. Money and precious goods were very much in abundance in the house. And the third courtyard was for women folk, because when right behind near the kitchen, there would be an open space for the women to hang out, gossip and things like that. And the Nalangatte or the kitchen was again with a courtyard, because large scale cooking would also take place along with small cooking for the family members. And today, what is the purpose of these large kitchens is, now any Chettiar family has a wedding or any big function for their child or anything, it is done in these houses and mansions. So, the large scale places are not completely lost till date. It gets used at least a couple of times in a year. Now, if you think of the construction, the evolution of a whole way of life from one culture is reflected use of materials and technology from their environmental culture, which is from Europe and Indonesia and other countries. And you can see many of the windows with orange segment shapes here and over here, with grilled doors because safety was an issue, ventilators on top, and the basket work is something that has emerged as a decorative craft which is flourishing till date. This is the central courtyard that is surrounded by teak columns and pillars, and there is a combination of the scarlet tiles and the sloping roof work to ensure rainwater does not enter the courtyards. The construction material, decor items and furnishings were mostly imported and were inspired by European and French style. This is the private entrance which still the authentic family of the Chettiars live in. This is like gives them a private access within the house within a secluded fashion. Like I mentioned before, for trading people, a sense of security and safety was required, where you can enter the house only one way and leave the house the same way. Having a back door was allowed only from the kitchen area and from the fourth courtyard. This is the dining hall which can at least seat 250 people on either side. Traditional kind of dining where the people actually squat on the floor. You can see a central door which again leads to an inner courtyard. This is the entrance view showing the details of their facade treatment with a combination of vibrant colors again. You have red, yellow, white, green. So there is a contrasting they are trying to express over here, which also accentuates the openings. If you look at the openings over here, the grill work is green. In contrast, it's set in the white wall with the red brickwork and stonework, and you have the idol of Lakshmi which is embedded, which is very important for tradespeople. You have these turrets like structures or these watchtowers at a higher level where you can see people coming from a distance. This is replicated even in the compound wall. The sense of a compound wall is also a sense of security that was required by these people. Like they were tradespeople, when they came, people knew that they came with abundance of precious material or money, and when people came to travel to meet them, it would be with money or other kinds of precious material. This is view of one of the Chettinad houses. The brothers' house that you see here is nearly 120 years old. This is the massive columns of wood that you see with a lot of detailing, marble flooring over here, and it's not number of stones over here, it is one single marble stone, and you have teak doors leading to different rooms, chandeliers imported, and massive wooden columns. Here you have the upper corridor having arcades connecting to different bedrooms with twin circular columns. You can see the Madras terrace roof right here and the parapet detailing in the floor above. Even here you have the use of vibrant colors continues in here with the yellow, red, green. You can see the detail in woodwork over here. This is the true jewel of every Chettinad house, the courtyards and the sloping roof leading to the courtyards. This actually helps drain the rainwater. In the olden days, they would have these huge brass and bronze pots where the rainwater would just trickle down and collect it. That was their method of rainwater harvesting. This is in the Nalangattai, which is the fourth courtyard, which even proves to be the kitchen. This is done in the roof detail where they can actually store kitchen tools like arvanvanais, which are nothing but cutting tools like knives and cutting boards. So these are the traditional tools used by them, which can be stored in a very safe and dignified way without hampering the view and spoiling the view of the house. Now if you think of the planning concept, it's actually believed to be arrived from the Kaveri Pumpattinam. That is the belief actually. That's how a Chettinad house is come into being. The planning concept is a reflection of their occupation and their style of living. The interiors is a reflection of where they have been and where they have come from. Because they are tradespeople, they constantly travel to South Asian countries as well as Europe. So there is a reflection of that. And then you have the fact that they were traders, safety was an issue and they needed the building and house to be safe from the outside. So they had courtyards punctured into the plan, which ensured there was adequate light and ventilation. And the dictated introverted planning was to make sure there was not multiple access and people couldn't enter the house easily. And the scale of spaces like the Kalyanam hall and the Bhojana hall was determined at that point of time itself to ensure that religious and family festivals will take place only in the house. Chettiars usually don't take up wedding halls or function halls to conduct family functions. They make sure that they go back to their hometown and do it in these mansions and palaces. Spatial organization, if you look at it, you have a service space, a multi-purpose central open space and a feasting space. A reception area, a Patagasalai, which is where you would actually have the discussion between tradespeople. The men of the house would discuss. This was a raised platform and this is a connection between the courtyard and the central living area. This is the secured and secluded space which was used even for storage of material or money or any such things. This acts like a buffer between the outer room and the inner room. Now, from the Chettinad case study, we have learned how exactly a house can be or a building can be preserved when funding is not an issue. Now, we come back to monuments in our country. If you actually look at monuments in our country, they are majority of stone and brick masonry structures. So, when you are thinking of masonry structures and stone structures of such massive size built at that point of time, obviously there has been a lot of wear and tear in the structure. So, it is very important that with change in time to even retrofit these buildings, especially to protect them from disasters like earthquake. So, the principal difference between a normal structure and a heritage structure is, yes, it is important that retrofitting is done, but it cannot be done any which way we want. We have to keep in mind that the heritage integrity of the building is not hampered or touched upon. So, we have to make a judicious selection and of application of these techniques such that the heritage value is not tampered with. At the same time, the aim of the retrofitting is that it is safe and secure for generations to come. So, it is multidisciplinary with a branch of science called conservation engineering. So, it is important that yes, it is a branch of engineering, but even they should be aware of the histrionics of the building or the history of the building and make sure that the historically authentic building is not tampered with unnecessarily. If it is a traditional building method of technology used or a monumental structure, techniques used will be pretty much the same. First, what are the steps involved? We have screening and evaluation. Screening basically just tells us what level of seismic retrofitting will be required based on the area the building is situated in. And based on the screening, the next evaluation process comes into being, where a detailed investigation is performed on buildings with medium to high priority based on the screening exercise. So, the objective is to identify the vulnerability of the structural and the non-structural systems and the components to the seismic loads. Now, we will just take two common examples that we use for repairing in a historic structure. Now, how do we strengthen a masonry wall? And the usual problem in a masonry wall is cracks. How do we go about repairing these cracks? The cracks can be repaired by grout injection. In case of excessively damaged walls, in addition to this grout injection, the area around will have to be cemented or coated with a cement concrete, and this is where we have the kind of cracks we have and what are the kind of things that we need to deal with, the recommended procedure. When the crack is less than 0.1 mm, it is injection with epoxy. When it is 0.3 to 3 mm, it is injection with cement grout that contains the shrinkage reducing admixture, and when it is greater than 10 mm, it is reconstruction of a damaged area with new brick units. So, this is how a reconstruction panel usually works with mesh and staples. So, this is the spacing of the staples of 0.3 meters and 0.5, and the mesh is placed. So, the wall is reinforced and held together. How would you go about repointing bed joints? The resistance of a wall to lateral and vertical loads can be improved by replacing parts of the existing deteriorated mortar. So, let us go back to the image over here. Here you have the mortar that has been removed, and this you have the grey portion is the existing mortar. Now, what do you do? Obviously, this part has become weak now because there is no mortar that is existing and supporting these brick units. So, a selection of the wall is repointed by using of these bed joints. Cement mortar is added and made sure that structurally these joints have been stabilized. So, what are the three important preservation principles we undertake when we retrofit a project? Number one, it should be preserved and retained to the greatest extent possible and not replaced wholesale by current materials that are available just to seismically reinforce it. Number two, any seismic retrofitting system that has been added or will be added, whether it's hidden or exposed, should respect the character of the building and the integrity of the historic building and be visually compatible with its design. Seismic work should be reversible to the greatest extent possible and allow for any future or improved systems that develop. We should be able to remove what we are doing today. Next part of making the historic building approachable to the current context is how do you make it accessible? Historically, old buildings have never been acceptable or approachable to people with disabilities. It's only recent years that emphasis has been placed on this, and that preserving historically significant properties, even though important, it is also very important that they are accessible to people with disabilities. So, how can these modifications be made? What kind of modifications are made? Sometimes it could be as simple as just providing an inexpensive ramp, or sometimes even interior exterior changes are required. Again, you have a 3-step approach to identify and implement accessibility modifications. Number 1, review the historical significance of the property and identify character defining features. Number 2, you have to assess the property's existing level of accessibility and what is the required level of accessibility. And then finally, evaluate accessibility options within a preservation context. Yes, you have to make it accessible, but at what price? What price is the building willing to pay? Or are you willing to compromise? So, that is a question we need to ask ourselves. So, what are the basic, how do we improve accessibility on the following priorities? Yes, the main entrance has to be accessible, only then can the public enter the building. So, you need to have a main or prominent public entrance that is accessible, including a path or a gate like a ramp. Then you need to have access to goods and services, like if you are having, like a cafe or something like that. Providing accessible restroom facilities, that is again crucial, and creating access to amenities and secondary spaces. For instance, if there is a staircase and to go into upper floors, you need to make sure there is an elevator that is provided. If it is not possible to provide it within the historic fabric, it may be taken to the outside and an enclosure may be added on for it at a later date. Readily achievable accessibility options. What can be done without hampering the site too much? And the level of the site and the entrance, you have to create a designated parking space. So, if a handicapped person is coming, they don't have to walk too much from the entrance. You need to install basic ramps which will not hamper with the integrity of the building. Now, coming to the interiors, you need to rearrange any tables, displays of furniture which is very narrow or a wheelchair may not be able to pass through. In an elevator, you need to make sure there are raised buttons, or a blind person or a handicapped person may use it. You need to offset the hinges to increase the space of the doorways. Usually in some old buildings, the doorways could be narrow. That something has to be done. Restrooms are very important. If an existing restroom cannot be tampered with, it's better to build a new restroom following the accessibility standards, where you have full length bathroom mirror, you have a higher toilet seat, you insulate the lavatory pipes so the prevent burns. You rearrange the toilet partitions such that you increase the maneuvering space and a wheelchair can enter. You install some grab rails in the toilet stalls. Now, we come on to the culmination of this unit, which is heritage site management. We have seen a case study of preservation. We have seen how to seismically retrofit and make a site accessible to the general public, or accessible by handicapped people and everybody. Now, how are these principles overall going to be applied in a heritage site management project? When you think of a World Heritage Site, its main thing is to conserve the values for which it has been recognized. That is our first primary aim. It is for a particular set of criteria it has been selected. So, any work that we do should not hamper the criteria. Now, the planning process. You have to take an inventory of the existing resources. Next, you need to categorize and evaluate those resources. And then finally, from that inventory, you need to determine the priorities for legislation, finances, the kind of people you need working, equipment, interpretation, marketing, etc. Now, basic planning requirements. Cultural sites need a comprehensive regulatory plan. So, what does this include? You have a boundary survey and description. So, boundary actually demarcates your site very clearly, and if required, a buffer zone is provided. And if it's an urban setup, you need to make sure that the buildings that are surrounding the site are not hampering the heritage character of this building by having very large signages, very tall buildings which are obstructing the skyline and things like that. Next, you have a land use plan. The comprehensive land use plan should include any nearby settlements and a full corridor to the nearest urban center. As an urban site, the boundary lines and the buffer zones should all be clearly demarcated, so it can help us protect the historic streetscape. The most important thing is the conservation or site plan. This delineates the pertinent conservation issues, analyzes these issues, and determines what are the scientific limitations this site will have, and also what concept of tourism can be attached to this site, the vision and opportunities that can be offered to visitors. Continuing from the conservation plan is the utilities and service plan. Now that you've decided it's going to be open to tourists, you need to have conveniences like electricity, sewers, water, telephone, fire and police, which are not only useful for the tourist people but also will help conservation efforts. These services are important, but not so that the integrity of the site be jeopardized. Now is the community development plan. The quality of life of the people in the vicinity of the site and the surrounding areas has a major tell on the quality of tourism and the heritage site. So, this community development plan will not only support the economics of this, but also the cultural and the employment side of it along with the community in the tourism sector. What is a tourism plan? Tourism plans officials should also be consulted when a conservation plan is being made. Any overlays that are there, they should recognize the goals, the physical limits and the visitor opportunities that are there. Transportation is number one criteria we need to think about, to and fro from the site and at the site if your site is very large. What kind of guest services are you willing to provide? Accommodation, food, toilet facilities, what level? Do you expect them to stay overnight, or if they are going to go back and forth, how does it work? Site tours, training and licensing of guides, information and interpretation. Finally, museum installations, visitor paths, information centers, admission kiosks, sale outlets, souvenirs for tourist people, all of that. Now, conservation plan and tourism plan are both very important. So, the next stage is how do you coordinate and make sure the conservation and tourism plan go hand in hand. So, it is very important that sometimes what a land use plan will do is right next to a heritage building, it will allow for an 8-story unsightly structure, or there could be a barren parking lot place with honking cars and vehicles and things like that. So, to avoid all this, you have to ensure conservation and tourism planning go hand in hand. Then overall planning committee should also be involved, so such risks and wastes can also be avoided. So, now through this level of heritage site management, from the case study, we have come to the end of this lecture. We have come to the learning outcomes. We have studied the Chettinad Palace in Karnataka Katan. In the Chettinad Palace, we have seen how the guidelines of preservation can be reinforced and how a building can be preserved for generations to come, even without not assigning too much of an everyday use to the building. The next thing is back to the monuments. When you think of monuments and large scale temples and structures made of stone and brick, how can these buildings be made safe in terms of seismic retrofitting, and how can we make it structurally safe for the people who are going in and out of these buildings? And then we come to accessibility to historic buildings. Olden days, the buildings were not accessible to handicapped people, of different kinds of handicapped people. It's very important that now it is inclusive architecture, that is, it includes all kinds of people who can visit the place. And finally, we have seen heritage site management. At the end of this lecture, we should be able to answer these questions. discuss seismic retrofitting with the help of two commonly used methods, what are the principles to be followed before making a historic site accessible, what are the salient principles of heritage site management. That brings us to the conclusion of this lecture. Thank you.